The New Orleans Pelicans have been one of the biggest laughingstocks in the NBA for the last 4 years, and much like the Kings, they continue to fumble the bag with all the young guys on the roster and never really develop them nor develop a real culture along with a clear direction. The Zion situation, the Lonzo Ball situation, the incompetence in regards to drafting guys that fit with this roster along with building a competent roster. New Orleans consistently shoot themselves in the foot whether they have momentum in regards to them making it to the playoffs with a certain young core, for example Anthony Davis, and they did nothing with it, so much so that AD decided to get the hell out of New Orleans. And his career will elevate with a championship ring, and the same thing goes with CP3, except he never got a ring. Throughout this franchise history, they only won 2 playoff series, and they never sustained to continue to building a competent roster for them to compete for championships. So in this video, I'm going to explain why the New Orleans Pelicans managed to have one of the most dysfunctional franchises in the NBA. But first, A-Man say man, this is the A-Man Show back at it again for more content. Make sure y'all subscribe. I post NBA content. My goal is to hit 1,000 subs by the end of the year, so subscribing and turning on post notifications and smashing the like button on this video and all my videos too makes a big difference. So that out of the way, enjoy the video. The New Orleans Pelicans, since they have relocated in 2002, which was my birth year by the way, they have been known by front office mismanagement and continue to have misses in the draft and failed to build a sustainable, competent roster around their superstar. It started when they drafted Chris Paul with the 5th overall pick in 2005, and he made an immediate impact right away as he improved the record by 20 wins. And Chris Paul will be the recipient of the Rookie of the Year and touted as the next great point guard to build around for the future. Despite that, the front office will make miss after in the 2006 draft. They drafted a center in Hilton Armstrong with the 12th overall pick over Dabo Cephalosha, who would have provided the needed perimeter defense, and spent the 15th overall pick on Cedric Simmons, who only lasted 1 season with Cleveland. 2006 was a pretty weak draft, and although Rajon Rondo and Kyle Lowry were in that draft class, they had Chris Paul, so there's no need to draft any of them. But these guys they've drafted were duds anyways, and should have added Cephalosha on the roster. And in free agency, they traded for J.R. Smith, who was during that time 20 years old, and he frequently was a cancer to the locker room. And also they traded for Tyson Chandler from the Bulls, in which he developed into a very solid interior lob threat and defender for the New Orleans. And most importantly, they got all in with the Peja Stojakovic signing, in which they gave him a 5-year $69 million deal to pair with CP3 as the second option and make that push towards the playoffs in this historically difficult Western Conference. During the 07 season, they actually had an 8-3 start, and they looked like a legit contender in the West before all 3 their pieces were hampered with injuries. David West missed 30 games with injury, Chris Paul missed 18 games due to ankle issues, and Peja Stojakovic missed 69 games due to back issues. And that contract they gave him looked like a big mistake, because this contract has crippled their cap space in terms of flexibility goals, along with no viable rotation players in that 06 draft they selected. It was just a bad year in 07 for the Hornets during that time, but in 08 they managed to turn that around, and they have the best season of their franchise history. They won 56 games that year and was the second seed in the Western Conference behind the Lakers that year. And CP3 was second in MVP voting behind Kobe, as he had one of the most decorated pure point guard seasons of all time. David West became a top 10 power forward in the league. It even made the All-Star team that year. Tyson Chandler became a legit lob threat, along with being one of the better defensive bigs in the league. Stojakovic was putting up 16 points per game on 44% shooting from 3 on 7 attempts and was leading the NBA in 3-point makes per game. They were top 7 in both offense and defense that year, and they won a playoff series by gentlemen sweeping the Mavericks before losing in a tight 7-game series against San Antonio. New Orleans were up 3-2 against the Spurs before the whole team vanished outside of CP3 and David West. The reason I mentioned this is because they should have added another wing like a Nick Young, Wilson Chandler, or a Jared Dudley in the 07 draft, but instead they went with another dud and Julian White, and they tried fixing the wing issue with the signing of Morris Peterson, and that didn't help either. Furthermore, New Orleans felt like they have a championship roster, and they didn't feel the need to add more pieces on the roster. So they became complacent. They drafted Darrell Arthur with the 27th pick in the 08 draft, and then immediately traded him for cash considerations. Arthur went on to be a solid rotation piece for years, while the Hornets bench remained one of the worst in the league. They made one big move, and that's signing James Posey on a 4-year, $25 million deal, and he wasn't a shot creator. The team expected him to be the missing piece, but he's just really a luxury role player on a team that still lacked a legitimate option next to CP3. The front office essentially bet their internal growth would outpace the rest of the West. They didn't account for the fact that the Lakers had a full season with Paul Gasol coming back. The Blazers and Thunder, then what the Sonics, were rising. The Nuggets were about to trade for Chauncey Billups and became a powerhouse. Meanwhile, New Orleans continued to plummet, where they have a first-round exit against the Nuggets, and they got gentlemen swept. Everyone besides Chris Paul and David West gone worse. Stojakovic went from shooting 44% from 3 the year prior to now shooting 38% from 3. Tyson Chandler dealt with injuries, turf toe, and was in and out of lineups. And in Game 5 against the Nuggets, they got blown out by 58 points, in which was the worst loss in playoff history. For the next 3 seasons, they remain in no man's land, where they are not bad enough to rebuild, but not good enough to compete for a championship, as they make their last playoff appearance in the CP3 era, where they got bounced by the Lakers in the first round. With new management by replacing Jeff Winters with Dell Demps, in which this is very important in this video because this man is one of the most illogical and dumbest DMs in recent memory. Now, everyone knows about the CP3 proposed trade to the Lakers got vetoed because it was owned by the NBA, and Stern made it the move to veto it and eventually got traded to their counterpart in the Clippers in exchange for Eric Gordon, who was a up-and-coming star 2 guard who was putting up 20 points or more on solid shooting splits, along with Al Farouk and Minu. Chris came in along with a first-round pick. From there, the Pelicans were in full rebuild mode as they were a bottom feeder in the lockout season, and from there, they received the first overall pick, in which they selected their franchise player in Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis will go on and become not only the best power forward in the league, but the best big man in the league for multiple seasons until Giannis took his spot in 2019. To tell you how frustratingly mediocre the AD era was from 2012 to 2019 is an understatement. Dell Demps, the GM during that time, had a habit of trading away first-round picks and young guys to get established players, and that backfired heavily because in a small market like New Orleans, you need to draft young guys and develop them in order to have success. But he thought it was a good idea to trade for established talent, and that's never going to work in the long run. Although he made the home run pick on AD in 2012, but you also have the Clippers pick, in which the 10th overall pick, and he spent it on Austin Rivers, who was a mid-role player at best. And the guys that were picked after him were Draymond Green and Chris Middleton. And let's go back a year, and they had a first-round pick in 2011. Demps stupidly traded that pick to the Blazers for Jared Bayless. Yeah, Jared Bayless. You know what happened with that pick? That pick ended up being the 19th overall pick and selected Tobias Harris with that pick. Hell, if Demps had that pick, he would have went with Jimmy Butler.
Tobias Harris over me?
Moving forward, in 2013, Demps traded the 6th overall pick to the Sixers, in which Nerlens Noel would be selected with that pick and a first rounder the year prior in exchange for Drew Holiday, in which it was a good move as he became a very solid 2 guard for New Orleans for 8 seasons. But they costed themselves young assets for 2 years and held the first round pick in 2015. Demps traded that 2015 pick for Omar Asik. Yeah, Omar Asik. And then proceeded to sign this man on a 5-year, $60 million deal, and proceeded to sign Solomon Hill on a 4-year, $48 million deal based on what he did in the playoffs with Indiana. Since then, he averaged 6 points per game in his entire time there. By constantly trading picks for players like Drew Holiday, Omar Asik, and Nikola Mirotic, he prevented the team from being ever finding cheap, young talent to surround Davis. This forced the team into a max contract or bust cycle that was idiotically unsustainable. This man, for some reason, is so impatient that he will rather sign shitty role players on big, damn near max contracts who don't fit with this roster at all, instead of drafting key young players and developing them and fits great alongside your franchise star. And in result of that, the Pelicans during the AD era only had 2 playoff appearances and 1 playoff series win. Outright disappointing. Even though they landed Boogie Cousins in the Buddy Hield trade back in 2017, and it was a win, the technical fit alongside AD was always a question mark on defense. And when Boogie Cousins got hurt, the lack of a plan B, because Demps traded all their picks to get him, led to the total collapse of the AD era. And add in the cherry on top, how he handled the AD situation in his last year with New Orleans, when Rich Paul, who was AD's agent, privately informed Demps of Davis's trade request on January of that year of 2019. Instead of coordinating with the agent to manage the narrative or fielding a counteroffer, Demps reportedly ignores Paul's calls and tried to call AD directly to convince him to stay, because Rich Paul felt he was being ignored and that the Pelicans were taking his request seriously. He went public with the trade demand. This immediately destroyed the Pelicans' leverage and invited a whole media circus. Initially, he demanded the whole Lakers' young core along with multiple first-round picks, and he shut down the market to get AD in the trade deadline. And from there on, AD refused to shoot up, rightfully so, and got to the point where AD went with Rich Paul instead of the Pelicans' medical staff in regards to his shoulder injury. And from there, going to the All-Star break, the Pelicans officially fired Dell Demps. Looking back at it, it's so funny how mentally weak he was as GM, to the point where he made all these panicking moves, and how he handled the AD situation, where he essentially begged him to stay and ghosted both Rich Paul and Magic Johnson, who was the team's president for the Lakers during that time. Now, a new era begins in New Orleans, where David Griffin became the head GM, and the Pelicans received the first overall pick in 2019, in which they selected a projected generational talent in Zion Williamson. Later, they also finally traded AD to the Lakers for Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Josh Hart, along with multiple first-round picks. For the whole decade, you cannot talk about this team without mentioning Zion's availability. When he plays, Zion was one of the most efficient scorers in NBA history. From 2020 to 2024, his availability was a coin flip. Even when he had a healthy switch, like playing 62 games this season, the team's lack of a backup plan meant they were always one minor string away from a lottery finish. The best ability is availability cliche has never been more painful than it was for this era. Not just that, but David Griffin, who was the same guy that constructed that Cavs roster around LeBron that won a championship in 2016 along with making multiple finals appearances, this man wasn't that much better than Demps. I mean, this guy was making questionable moves all over the place. Firstly, he paired a washed up Eric Bledsoe along with Steven Adams, and that hurt Zion's development despite him being an all NBA level defender in just his second year. The handling of the Lonzo Ball situation, in which they got pretty much nothing from that sign and trade deal. They let this man walk despite him not only shooting 40% from 3, but one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, and is a perfect fit for Zion. And guess what? He was 23 during that time and had the chance to become an all-star one day. They went with Devontae Graham in the Hornets trade instead of Lonzo Ball, because they were afraid of being in the luxury tax if they signed Lonzo Ball on a bigger deal. Get the fuck out of here. Graham will be a liability on both offense and defense for the Pelicans, and he'll eventually be out of the league in the next couple of seasons. Zion in 2022 dealt with injuries and was in and out of lineups along with weight issues, and despite the Pelicans having a below 500 regular season, they managed to make the playoffs as an 8th seed, and during that season they made a desperate move to get CJ McCollum, and he played the best basketball of his career with averages of 24 points per game and 6 assists per game on 49% shooting for the rest of the 2022 season, and they made the first seeded Suns sweat, taking 2 games, especially from the performance of Brandon Ingram in the first round. Although they lost in the first round against the Suns in 6 games, the following year, the Pelicans were at one point the first seed in the West with an 18-8 record going to December. They were both top 5 in both offense and defense. Zion was averaging 26 per game on 61% shooting from the field. Brandon Ingram was giving you 25, 6, and 6 on near 50, 40, 90 splits, and CJ McCollum was giving you 21 per game on solid shooting splits. And the other very good 3-and-D guys such as Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Najee Marshall, Jose Alvarado, and a very solid center in Valanciunas. This Pelicans roster definitely can compete with the best of the best in the NBA in the 23 season, but everything collapsed when Zion Williamson again missed time with injuries, and after January 22nd, they plummeted to a negative 1.5 net rating, ranks them 25th in the NBA over the next 2 months of that season, and finished with a 42-40 record and lost in the play-in against OKC. From there on, the Pelicans went from a great situation where they have the roster to compete for a championship to a laughingstock within 2 years. The very next year, the Pelicans had a 49-33 record. Zion had the most healthiest season of his career, and the Pelicans looked like a solid playoff team and were minutes away from facing the Nuggets in the first round if it weren't for the Zion hamstring injury against the Lakers in the play-in tournament. And the Pelicans still made the playoffs as the 8th seed, but they got swept by the Thunder. In the offseason, David Griffin decided to trade Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance Jr., along with salary dumps and multiple first-round picks for DeJounte Murray, and it's safe to say that this was a horrible move. Dyson Daniels immediately exploded in Atlanta, winning Most Improved Player last season and leading the league in steals. Meanwhile, Murray suffered a season-ending injury just 31 games into his Pelican tenure. This trade stripped the Pelicans of their best point of attack defender and their remaining draft capital, leaving them with no way to improve the roster when the 21-61 collapse began. And even with the Ingram trade, they just received Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, and a first-round pick. Yes, this little, and he relied on an aging Jonas Valanciunas and later Kelly Olynyk and Cody Zeller. And that led to them having one of the worst rim protecting teams in the NBA. With the team clearly needing shooting and size, Griffin used the 24 pick on Yeast Missy, and while he has shown flashes, he was a raw prospect for this team that Griffin was claiming was in win now mode. And eventually, David Griffin finally got fired just last year. Eventually, Joe Dumars takes his place, and his first move is to trade away CJ McCollum, a Kelly Olynyk to the Wizards for Jordan Poole, and as of right now, he has been an afterthought and no longer a rotational player on one of the worst teams in the NBA. And then in last year's draft, Dumars decided to stupidly trade up for the 10th overall pick to get Derek Queen. And no offense to Queen, I think he can be a very solid player in this league, but the fact that the Pelicans traded away their unprotected pick of this year to the Atlanta Hawks, which projected to be a top 5 pick, and we all know how highly anticipated this coming draft class is going to be. They would have had Derek Queen and potentially get guys like Caleb Wilson, Derek Pearson, DeBonsa, Boozer, Noah Emmet, all of these cats. This man Joe Dumars caps it off by saying that they're not far off from winning. Huh? What are you talking about? You think that a Zion Williamson, who has peaked as a player, who has never developed a reliable jumper and never developed as a defender, who's playing with Derek Queen, who doesn't complement Zion's game whatsoever, especially Queen being an interior in and out scorer who also doesn't space the floor either, and add in the horrible negative 12.3 net rating when both of them were playing alongside each other. You also have an insufficient player in DeJounte Murray. You literally have no spacers on the roster. I mean, this is a poorly constructed roster, and this man has the audacity to think that they're not far off from winning. Winning what, man? Like, winning what? You have back-to-back seasons of losing 50 or more games, man. This team, let alone this franchise, there is a reason why they're a laughingstock. This Pelicans franchise have cemented themselves as the NBA's premier cautionary tale of organizational dysfunction. A franchise that essentially treats generational superstars like winning lottery tickets it constantly forgets to cash. They are a laughingstock not just for their below 500 all-time winning percentage or their status as one of only 2 active teams to never reach a conference finals appearance. The Pelicans are the NBA's version of a guy who wins the lottery every few years but still ends up broke. They have had 2 generational stars in 20 years, Chris Paul and Anthony Davis, and they have absolutely nothing to show for it. No conference finals, no rings, just a mountain of what ifs. They are a team that consistently lands generational superstars but lacks the organizational stability to do anything with them, eventually trading away their future to fix mistakes of the present between the medical staff purchase, the non-existent spacing on the court, and a front office that seems to be ignoring modern basketball trends. They've earned their reputation as a dysfunctional laughingstock that just can't get out of its own way. And that's the end of the video. This is probably the longest video I have ever made in this channel, but I appreciate y'all from sticking it to the end. And also, what do y'all think about the Pelicans going forward? Do the Pelicans have a dark future ahead? Let me know, and be sure to subscribe for more NBA content and turn on post notifications. And that is all. Stay litty. This is the A-Man Show. Sign out.